Thank you, Wayne. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all again to Basin Electric's 63rd annual meeting. This meeting would not be possible without the people who spend months planning it, so please join me in thanking our events and communication team for their hard work. There were some last-minute heroics associated with this meeting because what would a Basin Electric annual meeting be without a biblical weather event? I'll just call out the efforts of two of my teammates. Sarah Elder and Andy Buntrock were here late yesterday evening trying to prevent the floodwaters out there in the lobby from meeting our reception desk. So actually, Sarah's gotten married in the past year. It's Sarah Bitts, excuse me, Sarah. But I'd like to thank Sarah and Andy for their efforts as well. And as you know, from last year, the Bismarck City flower is the traffic cone. So we hope that your travels were not inconvenienced by the road construction that is going on across the city. So as Wayne mentioned, the theme of this year's annual meeting is investing for the future. And investing for the future is what Basin Electric was created to do when in the mid to late 1950s, the power requirements forecasts of the Bureau of Reclamation, which is now WAPA, and the forecast of its preference customers across the Great Plains recognized that load would soon exceed allocations from WAPA to cooperative preference customers. This, of course, led to enterprising cooperative leaders to form Basin in order to meet their future power supply needs. So this brief history serves as a reminder that the reliability and the affordability that we benefit from today is the result of careful planning and prudent investments that occurred years and even decades ago. So over the next day and a half, we will discuss with you how we are striving to continue this tradition of stewardship. Investing for the future involves certain levels of uncertainty and ambiguity. For example, a question might be, will unit sales continue to grow in excess of 7.5% as they've done for the past 2 years? Are cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence data centers definite and definitive sources of demand, or another technology bubble that is doomed to burst? Continuing with questions, will the EPA be successful in its campaign of regulatory overreach? And finally, will natural gas prices rise to the benefit of Dakota gasification and the detriment of Basin, or vice versa? So with these questions, you can think of the words of Yogi Berra. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. But before uncertainty and challenges give way to frustration in the face of some of these questions, I remind myself of the old sailor's quote. The pessimist complains about the wind. The optimist expects it to change, and the realist adjust their sails accordingly. We strive to be realists at Basin Electric. So let me discuss with you some of the ways that we are setting our sails accordingly. Growth, which I touched on a moment ago, is a great example. Last year, our unit sales volumes to members increased 7.5%, which was on top of 7.8% growth in 2022. Through June of this year, our unit sales growth is a robust 6.3%. Post-COVID, we recognize this acceleration in actual and projected growth. And our capital expenditure for the next 10 years, that forecast has now ballooned to $8 billion. This amount of investing for our future will almost double the size of our current balance sheet, which is $8.5 billion. To address this growth, we carefully analyzed the impacts that this growth would have on our capital structure. In short, it pressured our financial metrics and it required a higher targeted margin to support this growth. So, in 2022, we raised our targeted margin from $75 million to $150 million. This action was consistent with our board policy 2, which calls on us to set rates that maintain our A credit ratings. Given that our targeted capital structure is roughly 75% debt and 25% equity, it makes sense for us to maintain solid credit ratings as well as a strong financial profile so that we can economically fund our capital expenditures in the debt capital markets. The change to our targeted margin is pretty straightforward math, but there is a more relatable analogy, and I would just make that to a growing family. For example, when a young couple living in a 2-bedroom home decide to have children, they may move into a 4-bedroom home. They have gone from a house possibly costing $150,000 to a $300,000 home. And the 20% down payment required by the bank has gone from $30,000 to $60,000. The Basin family is growing in a similar fashion, and the math is not indifferent to what the growing family experiences. Growth presents both opportunities and risks. The biggest opportunity is for our members to experience higher standards of living through economic growth, which they have. With respect to risks, many of these loads can materialize faster than Basin can build generation. That impacts both reliability and affordability. To mitigate some of these risks, we have worked with our members to develop innovative rates for cryptocurrencies and large loads. These rates are designed to do a number of things. First, they are designed to incent loads to develop in parts of our service territory with low congestion, or said differently, ample generation and transmission. Second, these rates are designed to incent loads to react to market price signals once they are online. Through a combination of these first two mechanisms, these rates are also designed to insulate our Class A rate from stranded investment and price volatility. So we recognize that the risk mitigation provided by these rates is limited. Supply and demand imbalances can still occur in the markets, and Basin is ultimately responsible for reliability. And we will have to build if demand outstrips supply, recognizing that the limitations of these rates. Basin's member advisory committee, which consists of myself and our district CEOs, is discussing the developments of rates with some form of contribution in aid of construction, or kayak. Basin, and this is another example of us setting our sails accordingly, because Basin is not unique in, or as it considers, a kayak mechanism. For example, Duke Energy, which is an investor-owned utility and the nation's second largest electric utility by revenue, just announced the development of a similar rate mechanism in June. Also, any number of G&Ts are taking similar steps with respect to kayak. We are considering a kayak mechanism to respond to the changes in load growth that we are seeing. Large loads for our cooperatives used to be 5 or 10 megawatts, and we all celebrated when we landed one of these loads. In the span of just the past few years, large loads are now looking for hundreds, if not thousands, of megawatts. This change is, of course, largely driven by the technology sector. Let's think back to the turn of the century. At that time, Google was 2 years old. Microsoft was still sending us their products on compact discs. Amazon was only selling books, and Facebook did not even exist. Now, if we flash forward to the present, the business models of these companies are almost exclusively focused on cloud computing. And the electrons that we produce and you distribute are the raw materials for these new business models. Accordingly, the utility industry and Basin need to adapt our business models to these new large loads. And admittedly, the utility industry and Basin has not arrived at a solution. But the need for a new business model is pretty straightforward. For example, Basin's existing generation fleet, which has been built over 60 years, and is on our books at an installed cost of just over $800 per kilowatt. Compare that to a new unit. A new baseload combined cycle plant is estimated to cost between $1,700 and $2,000 per kW. So rapid growth and higher costs have significant implications for the long-term ratepayers who have financed the development of our system over the past decades. While new generation is expensive, in its absence, power markets will impose a very heavy price. Late last month, PJM, which is the nation's largest regional transmission organization, announced that capacity prices in their latest auction had increased 9-fold. That is a 9-fold increase year over year in their capacity auction. Exelon, which is the largest electric utility in the nation by revenue, expects a double-digit increase for their consumers solely as a result of the capacity auction. It doesn't even include any reaction by the energy market. My comments in this regard as they relate to growth is in no way suggesting that growth is bad or unwanted. My comments are simply an acknowledgement of the changing circumstances we face and the need to adapt or to set our sails accordingly. If you look at our ongoing capital projects, we have done just that. We currently have 11 major capital projects underway with a price tag of $1.9 billion. The largest of these projects, as Wayne referenced, is Pioneer Phase 4. Pioneer is expected to come online in 2025 at a cost of approximately $800 million. The project is ahead of schedule and it is under budget. I congratulate our engineering, procurement, and construction teams for this accomplishment. Thank you. So as growth projections accelerated post-COVID, we recognize the need for Pioneer and its 580 megawatts, and our board approved that project in September of 2022. A 3-year engineering, procurement, and construction cycle is something we will not likely see again in the near future. Supply chains are stressed, and global growth in electricity demand has stretched out lead times for major equipment. We are seeing this firsthand as we plan our next major generating unit. Last August, as our growth projections continued again to accelerate, we recognized the need for additional baseload generation. In December of 2023, the Basin Board authorized $7 million for the initial development work. And we made our plans public in May of this year, or about 3 months ago. We expect this project to be online in 2030, a 7-year development cycle compared to the 3 that we're going to complete with Pioneer. Developing another generating facility in Northwest North Dakota does create additional geographic concentration and risk in our generating portfolio. We have been mitigating these risks, though, for 60 years by building a transmission system for delivering electricity to our members. This risk is also mitigated by the transmission that you have been building for 75 years or more. The location of this facility in Northwest North Dakota also capitalizes on the inexpensive natural gas produced in the Bakken. So this is a continuation or an extension of our historical strategy. Instead of mine-mouth coal for cheap fuel, we are now capitalizing on well-mouth gas for cheap fuel for our generating facilities. This project will further mitigate risk by responding to market price signals. In 2023, the highest prices in our SPP footprint were in this region. That signals the need for additional generation in the area. Absent new generation, these high prices would persist, and they would be borne by members in the form of higher rates that you pay to Basin. So as higher prices began to materialize in this region in late 2022, our transmission team developed a number of plans and took quick action to address them. In short order, they developed and implemented a remedial action scheme with SPP, and they partnered with WAPA to design and install dynamic line rating equipment on WAPA's 75-mile Williston to Charlie Creek transmission lines. These actions have had favorable impacts both to our reliability and our costs. I thank again our transmission team for their sense of urgency in addressing these issues with both WAPA and SPP. Last year, I mentioned to you that a number of factors were constraining our efforts to ensure reliability. Most notably, the EPA is on a determined campaign of regulatory overreach. This threatens our existing generation assets, but also severely restricts what technologies we can use to deploy for future reliability and cost effectiveness. Faced with the EPA's efforts, it is quite frankly difficult not to be a pessimist. The optimism that I mentioned earlier is sometimes in short supply, but again, we strive to be realists and set our sails accordingly. And as realists, we recognize that the United States economy requires our dispatchable resources to provide us all with higher standards of living. As an example, during SPP's peak last August, 74% of SPP's generation mix was coal and natural gas. 74%. Similarly, During MISO's peak a few days later, 75% of MISO's generation mix was coal and natural gas. To defend our all-of-the-above energy strategy, we have developed and began executing on an all-of-the-above legal and regulatory strategy. While this can't be described as necessarily an enjoyable effort, it is good to see cooperative principle number 6 at work, namely cooperation among cooperatives. In addition to NRECA and other GNTs, we have partnered with the Lignite Energy Council locally, attorney generals of several states, and other industry partners to ensure future reliability. We would much prefer continuing our pursuit of innovation rather than being subject to the EPA's regulation. Basin, as Wayne referenced, is a leader in CO2 capture and storage. Over $100 million has been invested at the Integrated Test Center at Dry Fork Station to evaluate various technologies for CO2 capture and storage. And our largest subsidiary, DGC, began sequestering CO2 on February 9th of this year. Sequestered volumes are well ahead of budget, and currently the facility is the largest geological sequestration project in the world. We have a record of innovation that we can all be very, very proud of. If the EPA is successful with their regulatory program, it does spell a less reliable and more expensive future for U.S. electric consumers. In the event that we need to adjust our sails for regulatory headwinds, we can follow the example of Tri-State and that they have set navigating Colorado's energy mandates. We congratulate Tri-State on their progress with their responsible energy plan, and we are cheering for your success, but we might hope that we don't have to follow in your exact footsteps. One way to measure our success as a GNT is by the rates that we charge you, our members. As your GNT, we recognize our value proposition to you is affordable rates, and the majority of your costs are, or they originate here at Basin. In 2023, Basin's average rate per megawatt hour to members was $60. That was the 13th lowest of the 52 GNTs who reported their statistics to the GNT Accounting and Finance Association. The average rate reported by all GNTs was $74.54. So again, we are well below average. Several factors are contributing to financial pressure in 2025 that will necessitate a rate increase here at Basin. Lower projected surplus sales in the West and investment expenses related to growth are just some of these factors. We know that this is unwelcome news. And having shared this message at many of your annual meetings throughout the year, and after rolling out the specifics of the rate change over the last month, we do greatly appreciate the feedback that we have received from so many members related to how best to implement the rate change. So over the next day and a half, Team Basin will provide you with much more detail on the rate change and the other information that I have just begun to cover. In the financial report, Chris Johnson and his team will also discuss the investment we are making for the future and how we are looking at financing these investments. A panel discussion this afternoon will provide a cross-functional view of our investments for the future. The reliability panel this afternoon will cover a number of the investments we are making in plant, processes, and people to ensure a reliable future. And this panel will also discuss the regulatory constraints that we face in these efforts. Tomorrow, Chris Johnson's team will again provide a detailed review of our financial forecast and the rate change for 2025. Tomorrow, we will also update you on our ongoing strategic review of DGC, and we will have additional discussion on load growth and resource development. So we hope you find the agenda that we have put together informative, and we thank you sincerely for the time that you are devoting to attend Basin's annual meeting. Basin Electric is grateful to be your generation and transmission cooperative, and we are committed to adjusting our sales appropriately as we invest in a safe, reliable, and affordable future for our member owners. Thank you.